welcome to Life Unpotted community series. Excited to be recording today, excited to be creating an episode for you all. We have a great write-in from one of our listeners of a question I'm going to read here in a second. It's a great question. We're going to unpack it and get as nuanced as possible and just talk from our experience and what we've learned. Before we jump into that, I want to give you a reminder. If you like to read things, our Substack is popping off. Sophie and I are both writing more, and our writing styles are very different. So it's a nice contrast. You can go and probably find whatever it is you're looking for there. If you like the podcast, you're going to find different types of stuff. So you can always subscribe to our Substack to get a weekly update on our writings, happenings within the podcast community, all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be in the link below. So subscribe to that. We'd love to connect with you through our writing. So let's get into today's question. Hi, Sophie and Daisy. I have a question for the community podcast. I recently moved in with my partner. How can I set boundaries with my partner for times when I just want to be alone without hurting their feelings? I have a very sweet and loving partner that some days works from home at the same time as me and always finds a way to make conversation with me. But I sometimes just want to be left alone and not talk for some hours. Also, how can I create space for them to have their own time and space in our apartment, even though they don't ask for it?
So this is a good one, and I'm laughing because I feel like this really reflects how I've been in our relationship, Daisy, and it's interesting. I just want to say first and foremost, so the conversation we have on this podcast about connecting with yourself, understanding who you are, it is so important to remember that when you're in a relationship, it's so easy to look to the other person to satisfy your needs. It's so easy to think that the other person is where you're going to find your happiness from. And in my experience, starting a relationship or going through relationships throughout my life where I noticed I did have a lot of attachment, I really did look to other people to make me happy. And that led to certain circumstances happening, in my relationship with Daisy where I would kind of fall down this attachment or this kind of control of always needing her to be there, to hang out, to spend time together. And I think this happens to a lot of people, especially, we started dating during COVID where you're spending so much time together, or, when you meet someone, you're so excited to spend time with them. You feel so fulfilled. Maybe it's the first time you ever felt like you were really receiving love. And I think it's really interesting, though, to recognize that there's a line that we cross in relationships when we're in love with somebody where it's no longer out of love, but it's out of need. It's out of manipulation. It's out of expectation. It's not really out of, I want to spend time with this person because I want to spend time with this person. It becomes, I feel anxious, I feel insecure, I feel sad, I feel like I didn't have a good day, I feel like I'm scared about certain things, I feel angry. So I need that person to be here to make me feel better. And look, it's not about to say that our partners can never help us. I think a great thing about having a healthy relationship is developing a dynamic where you recognize when can you show up for your partner out of love and when it's dependency, when it's attachment, when it's really more rooted in fear. So that's kind of just when I wanted to get started off with this question, and recognizing that it can be really easy to be scared to hurt our partner's feelings. And in our relationship, I really appreciate Daisy setting boundaries with me of saying, hey, in the morning, I don't want to talk all the time. Or when I come home from work, I don't want to talk all the time because I am somebody who loves to talk, and we're quite different in that regard. So that's just going to be my introduction to this. I think it's an exciting thing to talk about. Relationships really mirror back ourselves. They mirror back all the things that we need to work through. And I think in order to have a healthy relationship, you have to understand yourself. So Daisy, let's get into this one.
Yeah, it's a funny conversation because it is a very hitting home conversation with anyone who's in a relationship, because these are conversations that if you avoid them, they are eventually going to blow up in your face, and resentment might appear, frustration might appear, and it's going to come out in a way that, unbeknownst to the partner, they had no idea you were feeling this in a way. And I think that's what you want to avoid, is getting to that place. I've certainly been to that place where I didn't want to communicate something. I didn't want to communicate a boundary. I didn't want to do it. I didn't realize I could do it. And then all of a sudden, the time you start setting the boundary is the time where you just don't have the wherewithal to have the patience anymore. And I think that can be a space where maybe it's not the healthiest way to do it. It might be you want to just casually communicate this and say, hey, like, and make sure the other person does feel secure in understanding that this is something that does make you feel safe and it is a way to make you feel loved and taken care of. And when you're sharing a space with a partner, that's so important. Your space, your home of where you live, it is so important that you feel comfortable being yourself in that space. And you want to cultivate that space for yourself and for your partner, for you to be in tandem, for you to be in coexistence of being able to enjoy their company, even though you may just be both doing your own thing in the space. And I think early on in a relationship of living together, I think it's great that you're already asking this question, because that is the time of when you do lay down the understandings, the learnings, the boundaries. And it can be quite a tumultuous time moving in together. You know, it's glamorized, it's exciting. There are so many beautiful things that come from it. But it is also a very difficult experience. But we know from this podcast that with all difficult experiences, the most beautiful flowers blossom, because it's a time to reflect, move through difficulties, learn things about ourselves, and learn things about our partners in this specific example that are going to help us have a more fulfilling relationship with ourselves and hence a more fulfilling relationship with our partners. And I think something that Sophie said is we might have a shitty day and we want to get home. And this is maybe like us talking from a COVID relationship standpoint of let's just get home. It's winter. Let's sit on the couch at 6 o'clock and just be there and not necessarily have an outlet for our negative emotions of how the day went and just kind of let them curate a space around us. And I think that in this example, you may not be thinking about your partner's emotions or your partner's experience, and you might just be kind of looking them as a place to hang your hat to feel better. And I think that this is where resentment can build. It's thinking about, okay, how can I take time for myself to show up best for my partner, since I'm going to be spending so many hours with them. They're going to be disposable to me at so many hours of the day, especially with work from home. How do I then cultivate actual quality time with this person to where I actually am still showing up as my best version to them? Because yeah, there are going to be times where maybe you make breakfast and this is the time where you are in your zen. This is like when you're just listening to something or you're not listening to anything and you just like to be quiet. And maybe your partner is a chatty person in the morning and they want to chat and they want to talk and they want to tell you everything in their mind. And it's easy to think, oh, like this is just the way things are because now we live together. But that's not the case. It's your space too. It's remembering like you're not just hanging out as people in a relationship, like you're living together. And I think that it can be a confusing thing to wrap your head around because you're like, oh, well, I can, I'm so excited that I can just push this need away that I have. But eventually, like 6 months down the line, a year down the line, you're going to be like, wait, I don't enjoy this at all. And now I'm really frustrated and annoyed and something bad happened. And now I'm mad at you for the past year of not allowing me to have this space. So yeah, I think that there's so much to talk about with this topic because it's something that's probably never ending. I think maybe sharing a space with someone, it is the most intimate thing you can do because that's where you go home to recharge and to let yourself be.
So I think it actually could be really, really helpful if we just share like a little bit from our experience to kind of understand, like, so Daisy, like when I was talking all the time and kind of just being myself and the one to share every single thing with you, which now I reflect was me kind of avoiding myself, like me not taking the time to be with myself, to go outside for a walk and always needing to be with somebody else. What prevented you from setting a boundary to begin with?
It's a really, really good question.
Like, why did it take for year 3 for this to come up and go, oh, right, like, we're not really, I mean, obviously we moved and stuff, but I'm wondering, like, were you scared to hurt my feelings? Were you not aware of the fact that it kind of felt smothering? Like, did it just take time for that to boil to the surface? Because I do think sometimes I've seen in myself, like, it takes time for shit to boil where you get so used to it that you're like, oh my God, I feel like I don't ever have space.
Well, I think this is actually a simple question. And I think, again, going back to the listener who wrote this question, and she's asking this question and she's very aware of it with the intentionality of them moving in together. I feel like when we moved in together, the intentionality was not there because it just happened. And it was very early on. And it just became a time of, let's hang out. Okay, we're going to hang out all the time. Like, it all just kind of blended. And it wasn't until we moved to Austin where I was like, oh, right, like, this is our life. It was in a very in between time. It felt like that. It wasn't very intentional just with the way we moved in. So I kind of, it got blurred for me of realizing, oh, right, this is what I need. I kind of forgot what I needed. I got lost in it. I got lost in the relationship. I got lost in being there as a friend or being there for you in ways that I forgot myself. So I think that's probably like the worst case scenario when you don't intentionally set these questions. And that's why it took longer for me to realize, because it was a habit that was cemented, that I never communicated to you that it wasn't something that I liked. So it did boil to get to a point where it became maybe not resentful, but maybe in some ways to where it was like, okay, there's no more space for this to happen. And I don't think that's what you want to happen. You want to have that conversation when there's still space for mistakes to happen, for people to slip up, because we're human and we're trying to cultivate a space. And I don't think that we necessarily ever had that conversation. It just happened really quick.
Yeah, and I think also, like, I think a really key thing to all of this, and from having my experience, is that I think a lot of times we're scared to hurt our partner's feelings. We're scared to say, hey, you know what? I really want to spend time alone today. I really want to spend time alone after work, and I don't want to spend time with you. And that doesn't mean I don't love you, but that means that I just want to spend time to myself. And I think the listener's question is, how do I approach this, right? What do I do with this partner who doesn't seem to really understand that? And I think the reality of it is you have to be honest. And I think this is just like everything in life, right? Like when we avoid having conversations because we're scared of somebody else getting hurt, we're not recognizing that sometimes we need to get hurt to free ourselves from our own suffering. So, for the example, in our relationship, I'm glad that you told me that maybe I was talking to you too much or maybe you needed space, because it made me look inward. And yes, I have done a lot of work, but that didn't mean that that feeling of getting hurt and abandoned, rooted in stuff from high school, didn't rise to the surface. And I didn't feel so much pain. And it took me a long time to realize that that pain I was feeling was not coming from you. That pain I was feeling was not coming from our relationship, but it was coming from my childhood experiences. And I think that is the biggest thing that can go wrong in a relationship, is when we think the pain that we're experiencing is coming from our partner, but it's just your triggers. It's just your trauma playing out as an adult. And when we don't recognize that, we run the risk of getting mad at our partner, of thinking they're the one causing this. But no, the reality of it is that you have all this pain that maybe you haven't looked at. And I would be curious about this listener's partner, if they are in therapy, if they are healing, if they are looking at themselves, because I think a lot of the time we do inevitably reach a point where if your partner is not able to take and incorporate feedback without getting so hurt and defensive, you kind of hit a roadblock. And it's, I think one of the most important things in a relationship is having the ability to, what is it? To implement and take feedback, which that happened a lot in our relationship, where I was like, hey, this is not working for me. And you're like, okay, let me hear you out. So it's like putting that defensive-ness aside, putting the fear and frustration aside, putting it all aside and saying, hey, okay, let me try to hear you out. You feel like you're getting really excited for this one, I guess.
Well, I think you jumped into a very important factor. You jumped right into it. That is just a factor for life, but also core need for relationships is taking accountability for yourself. And I just looking back at the question, she was concerned with, how do I set boundaries for my partner without hurting their feelings? And I think when it comes to that, the point in hurting them of their feelings, if you are saying something that you need, like a need that you need to have met, and that for whatever reason upsets them before they can understand that that's how they can show that they love you, then that means that they need to sit with that, and they don't need to hash that out with you. They need to understand, what does this bring up? Because within relationships, you are totally opening up all of your interpersonal relationship dynamics with your upbringing or with your past relationships. And it's one of the more difficult things we will ever do in life. I'm sure of that, because it makes you take accountability. And if you don't take accountability, you are then pushing your partner to hold your feelings for you. And that can be a very slippery road of, I'm not showing up for my partner the best of the way that I can. And I think when the listener is explaining this, they can talk about accountability and how, we are both here to be on parallel paths to grow together. Like, that's the cornerstone of a healthy relationship, is that we're not going to glue each other down and make each other stay the same in order to have that certainty of love in this relationship, but it's to lift each other up and to love each other, even though it might hurt us because we have to unlearn, or it might uncover a truth that is difficult for us to see within ourselves within this interpersonal relationship. And that is true love, is being able to push through that accountability for how it might make you feel, and showing up for that person in the way that they need. And I do think it's really important for this specific thing to have that alone time and to have that space. And I think that it's just really a beautiful conversation to have at the very beginning of moving in. The things I would do to be able to have done this.
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, like, this is why I have the hard conversations early on. Like, this is why it's like, all of a sudden then you're like married and it's like, oh, right, like I pushed this off for so long. And I just want to say, I think it was really great what you said about, like, the question is, I don't want to do this without hurting their feelings. And it's the same thing with a friendship, with a friend that maybe you're scared to be honest with. Like, the fact that their feelings hurt is not your responsibility. And that is the most annoying thing to ever hear when you're the partner, when you're on the other end. And I've literally, there's been time in a relationship where I've literally been like to Daisy, like, I'm not responsible for this.
And that is one of the hardest things to hear. It's a reminder of, you are alone. This is your responsibility. But on the flip side of the difficulty of that, is such a freeing feeling for multiple reasons. One being that you realize you have the capacity to work through it. It feels good to be autonomous in that way. And it also allows you to show up as a partner that is giving and not one who's taking independent. And that is always going to fuel a healthy relationship that is exciting, and it keeps you both moving forward versus pulling you both back, keeping you both stayed put.
Yeah, and I also want to say, so in that scenario where, you go to the partner and you say, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I have feeling kind of smothered. I really want to have more time and space when I come home to myself. I understand that we're living together, or we might be living together soon. And say your partner goes, well, so you don't love me, you don't care about me. And I think, whether you're having that kind of response or not, I think this is where the boundary comes in to say, your partner has to process that on their own. And you can, maybe it's about, like, we've had situations where it's like, all right, we're going to have this conversation, and then let me think about this. Let me sleep on this. Let me go for a walk, and can we check back in later? I think something that happens when you are dealing with intense emotions within a relationship, you have to know when to walk away. Because when you don't, you all of a sudden, it's the same thing with ourselves, right? Like, so go back to the whole thing about, we're always experiencing this life through our own lens. So when we experience our own emotions on our own, we have to know when there's time to say, okay, you know what? Like, I'm going to let the day go on, and I'm going to let myself process this and figure it out. If I keep going through the thought loop of worrying and worrying and worrying, where am I going to go? I need to give myself time to process. So of course, when you're talking to your partner about something, the same thing applies, because ultimately what we're talking about is an emotion arising. It's emotion coming up, and you look at the other person and you think it's from them. You think, oh, I'm being hurt from you. You're causing me this pain. But I am here to let anyone who's listening know that coming from somebody who has been really attached in relationships and has felt hurt when, a partner needed space, or felt like hurt when they needed alone time, I am now at a point where I recognize that that doesn't bother me anymore. I have given myself so much love, and I have given myself so much compassion, and gotten to know myself so much that I'm not scared to be alone. I'm not scared to be alone in my feelings. I don't feel like if somebody has a boundary, I'm being rejected. I don't feel like somebody expressing how they feel means they don't love me. I'm able to see it clearly for what it is. But the only reason I've gotten to this point is because I've taken that time to myself. I've taken that time to myself to process, to understand, to work through stuff. And I think that's why it's really important for your partner to be in therapy, or to be working on yourself. Because like you said, Daisy, the whole point of a relationship is to grow together. And to grow together, you must grow individually, because you have two individuals in a relationship, right? It's always just two people that create that dynamic and that relationship and the love. So I think it's recognizing that it's not your responsibility to work it out with your partner. That doesn't mean you say, hey, screw you. It says, hey, I love you. I care about you. And this is how I feel. And I'm here to talk through this with you. But I want to make sure you're processing it on your own, and that maybe the feelings you're addressing to me, maybe you need to look to yourself first. So that's something I think we incorporate in our relationship of like, we are not going to get the resolution we're looking for if us individually have not taken the time to ourselves to work through stuff.
Absolutely. And it is easy, I will say, like if your partner is going through a lot of emotions, or if moving in together and setting boundaries brings up a lot of emotions from past things in the relationship that gets brought up, it makes sense as a partner to be like, oh wow, they're going through a lot. Like I want to hold their feelings for them. And like I think a common role that people inherit from the way that they're brought up or the way that they experience life is like wanting to be a caretaker and putting others' needs before themselves. And I think that is a common thing where you're like, oh, this person needs me. I need to be there for them. And that's a slippery slope as well. I think that's an important thing to identify, because there's a difference between caring about your partner's needs and being aware that you want to support them. And then on the other end of it, it's your responsibility to feel what they are feeling. It's your responsibility. You take on exactly what they're feeling. And that's what you don't want to do. That's why the space of making sure, like, I need you to face this on your own. And once you do that, I'm more than happy to talk with you, to be here for you. But this is your journey that you have to be on. And I can support you in it, but I can't do it for you. And I think kind of having that is what does allow us to be independently together in a partnership. It's what allows us to be working from home together. It's what allows us to be able to maybe not have physical boundaries around us, especially if you're in a smaller apartment. It's an emotional boundary that you know that once you've talked through it and you've said it, that this person respects it and you've worked through it, and you can be comfortably together and understanding and knowing that this person is supporting you, even though they're not handling it for you. But this allows you to have your independence and know that your emotions are yours, their emotions are theirs. And even though you're both experiencing them from a similar experience, that they are rooted in something separate, and that you have the right to your own emotions. And that means you have the right to your own personality, your own thoughts, your own feelings, and you are separate people. And you're not losing yourself in the relationship. You're not losing yourself to not knowing where the lines blur of who are they and who am I. Because when you do move in together, you are in a way creating a life together, because you are going to spend more time together. Maybe you'll just have friends come over. Maybe you'll be making dinner together every night. You start to incorporate more togetherness, more similar shared identities. And I think it is crucial to understand that you are still entirely separate human beings, and drawing those boundaries and communicating them and taking accountability, each individual taking accountability, and both having the willingness to take that accountability, like listening to this podcast with your partner if you want to have the conversation and being like, okay, like, yeah, maybe we can do that. Okay. Like having a mutual understanding of where you want to get and what do you want to have in the relationship? What do you want the experience to be?
And I think you hit on a really, really important point. So it's like interesting. The listener writes in and it's like, I'm scared to hurt their feelings. Automatically, you're looking at the partner, you're looking outside of you. But what about looking in and going, why am I scared to hurt their feelings? Why do I associate honesty with fear of hurting somebody? Have you shown up in that way throughout your life where you have been scared to express yourself, where you are scared to let somebody down, where you're scared that if I tell them how they feel, then maybe they'll leave me. If I tell them how I feel, then maybe they'll leave me. If I tell them how they feel, maybe they won't love me. Or, it doesn't have to even be that. But for me, it's like I've been told I'm empathic. Like, I just feel like I don't even believe in that word. I feel like we all have the ability to care for other people. But I have such a strong emotional connection to people as soon as I meet them. And I feel like I just have always, like, I've took care of my younger sister when she was younger, just always kind of take on the role of wanting to help people. I always want to help people. And look, that's great. But you have to draw the line somewhere, because Otherwise, you're sacrificing yourself. You lose yourself. You have needs too, right? Like, you have to look and take care of yourself. So I think it's really hard to recognize when we are hurting people's feelings and people are being hurt. But the key thing is, you're not hurting anyone's feelings. People will hate this or love this, but the reality of it is, it's the same way we say your job's not causing you stress. It's the same thing we say that when the salad falls on the floor, it's not that. When your podcast setup isn't working, it's not the podcast. It's you. It's the pain that's within you that's causing you to be hurt. And I hope that doesn't come off harsh, because I can understand and acknowledge and sympathize and understand that it's really hard to work through this shit in relationships. It's really, really hard because it forces you to look at yourself. But I come at it with passion because I see that you can have such a healthier relationship and exist as two separate entities who can come together when they need to. And I just think that the first step for that is open and honest conversation, and realizing that just because your partner might feel hurt for 1 day, 2 days, or a week, if you really believe in a life with this person, if you really believe in that you guys are going to be able to work through this relationship for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you're going to have to start to have hard conversations. And you're going to have to get comfortable with that. And the ability to get comfortable with that is removing the fear of somebody being hurt means it's going to be over. No, you will find someone who wants to work through it with you. And if they don't, then maybe it's not a good match. I'm like, wow, I can't believe we've never talked about relationships. Like, there's so much to say. Maybe this is a new thing we start talking about, because it's like, I feel this is the easiest conversation I've ever had on the podcast.
Well, it's been a 3-year journey of being able to talk about this where it's not actively happening. I think like we've probably reached a point where like we have worked through a lot of this. And not to say like you're not always working through stuff, but it's not as like close to home because we have worked through it, you know. We're not going to get in an argument in the podcast about it. It's like having a healthy space and distance. But yeah, I think if you do have more questions about relationships, like we have done everything wrong. We've done some things right, and we've course corrected from how you're not supposed to do things, and whatever it may be. It's more so, I think, just coming down to like honest conversation and having accountability. And it's something you have to do every single day.
You can never do anything wrong because you're always learning.
Yeah, well, I mean
always
like air quotes, like doing things the way that they tell you not to do them. There's no specific way, but just
Who's they?
I don't know.
Who's telling us what to do in relationships? Are you reading relationship guides, Daisy?
No, that was something I did way back in the day. Yeah, I think that this question, I think that it can really be summarized into, you have to speak what your needs are. That's like your job and your responsibility. And the other person, you have to remind them that they have to be accountable for their emotions, and that you have to recognize, again, it's not your responsibility to take accountability for their emotions. They have to do it. I would summarize my response to someone asking this question that way.
Yeah, and I would summarize it by saying that be honest. Don't be scared to hurt someone's feelings, because expressing yourself isn't wrong. Expressing yourself is necessary for a long-term, sustainable relationship. And just know that real, healthy relationships require a shit ton of work. It's the same thing of your own life, your own self. Think about how much work it's taken for, if you've been listening to this podcast or if you're just joining, just the journey of self-growth and of waking up and recognizing you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions, you're not all these things that have been controlling you. So, and also remembering, and maybe this is something you could tell your partner, this is for their benefit. Like, there's going to be a time where they want to express themselves to you too, and they want to tell you, hey, look, this is bothering me. So it's not like you're doing anything wrong, but you're really just opening up a dialogue for you guys to say, hey, Daisy, I don't like when you leave the dishes or the clothes all over the floor. Okay? I'm just letting you know that. And then a week later, you're like, hey, by the way, Sophie, I don't like when you do this. And it's not confrontational anymore. It's not aggressive. It's just communicating a simple fact. And I think that opens you up to feel more comfortable expressing yourself in life. So what a great question. I really love this one. I really hope this was helpful. And as always, just remember, this is just our experiences. We're not freaking relationship counselors. But honestly, I feel like all you need is experience to ever learn any of this. And it feels like I feel we do have a healthy relationship now, but that's taking a lot of work of looking at ourselves, looking at the relationship and analyzing, okay, how can I show up differently? How can I listen more? How can I not react so much? And just to give you hope to the listener or to anyone's listening that if you're struggling in your relationship right now, or if you're anticipating things going wrong, remember that just like anything in life, difficulty does not imply failure. Just because something's hard does not mean that the flowers are not going to blossom and you're not going to have the most beautiful, healthy relationship.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that because moving in together can be such a joyous time, but it can also be a really difficult time because you are having the hard conversations. And I think it is important to say, like, to reiterate it, having difficult conversations and having difficult experiences can sometimes make us feel like, well, it's the person. They're the problem. It's them, and if I could only just not live with them, then there would be a solution. And unless it's an unhealthy situation, like that's a cop out in a lot of ways because there's uncomfortability within you, and it's something that is going to also help you grow. It's always also going to help you understand yourself and help you communicate things that maybe you never had to communicate to others before. So it's all a very exciting time and also a difficult time, but it doesn't have to be. It can be difficult for moments, and it can be joyous for more moments than it is difficult because you're facing things head on. So there's also always growth to be had from difficult conversations, and that is something really beautiful to share with someone that you decide to share your life with. It's a crucial skill, and it's something that's going to allow you to create a lovely life with your partner.
For sure. I'm excited about this topic. I think we should talk about relationships more. I think it's something that I've gained so much knowledge on by waking up and healing. Maybe a good podcast topic would be like, how do you heal? How do you go through a relationship when both people are healing? Like that's been a huge thing for us.
Yeah,
That's
that
hard.
would be an interesting one.
All
That would
right. Yeah.
that would
So
be.
thank you all for listening. Thank you for joining the Life Unpotted community series. As always, write to us your questions. If you have questions about your relationship, your life, your job, or you're just curious how the hell did we get to this planet, write us in. We're here. We're here to think deeply. We're here to think nuanced, abstract, and just dive deep because ultimately there's always some sort of solution, even if that solution is, I don't know, or the solution is knowing that your current reality does not reflect all unlimited possibilities of what you can have. We're here to remind you of that. So thank you for joining. Thanks for being part of the community, and we'll talk to you next week.